Okay. So now we come back to functional method and how to compute Green's functions in quantum field theory. So we begin by introducing the vacuum to vacuum functional. In QFT, and to that end we need the Lagrangian density in relativistic quantum mechanics, which is and the m squared will be, so we can put minus epsilon by 2 phi squared plus, I guess, right, because we want I. So at this level it is minus, so if I multiply by I, it should become minus, so it is plus I. So one analogy is that this is exactly analogous to the harmonic oscillator with enhancement of space and time points. So compare space and time coordinates. So compare the fact that I have dq of t only, and then e raised to I integral dt, and then this q dot square and minus the half factor is there, but half q dot square minus omega square q square. So from this we are going to integral d, the configuration space variable I call phi, but then put t x1 x2 x3 and do an e raised to I, and now I do a d4x, and now I do phi dot square but minus gradient phi's square minus m square phi square. Okay. So instead of considering a one coordinate problem in one time direction, I consider a one coordinate problem but as a function of 4-dimensional space time, but with the also with the Minkowskian metric. That is the main difference. And then the analogy is complete because the omega square term looks like the mass square term, and all the methods will, all the technical calculations will look identical. There is not much difference. At this point I could also comment a little bit about this business, why we put the Minkowski invariance, because we want Minkowski invariant S matrix theory in the end, of course. But if you go to the constructive approach of Weinberg, what he basically says is that, so remark on so here what we do is we start with You remember that we argued that if you have a weakly coupled system, it always boils down to introducing A and A daggers corresponding to single particle set of eigenvalues alpha. But now we implement the so-called, the word implement, Poincare invariance by identifying this eigenvalue set alpha with momentum k and sigma spin. Okay, these are single particle attributes. So, single particle momentum and single particle spin. And how does that connect? Well, recall in Poincare group we have has all the J mu nu J rho sigma commutators, and it also has the P mu P nu, and this is equal to 0, and we also have J mu nu P rho commutators. This J mu nu P rho, because J mu nu is rotation generator, it will only rotate the P's into each other. These are the 3D part is the usual rotation group, and this is the Lorentz Bus. So this is the full algebra. This is the algebra of the Poincare group. It has precisely two Casimir invariants. So first of all, it has exactly 4 mutually commuting observables, which are the P's, which become the K mu. Which become K mu, but remember that this will be using only the space like K, because there are 2 Casimir invariants. So if you did not have the translations, then you know that there will be 2 observables. One is the rotation J3, I mean it is equivalent to SU2 cross SU2, so there will be 2 independent observables. One you can say is your third axis rotation. But once you put in the P mu's never leave any of the J mu nu invariant. So the only mutually commuting observables available in Poincare group are the K mu. However, there are 2 Casimir invariants. Which are the 2? Who knows? One is J squared. No, not quite. Sorry, not J squared. One is sum of the P squares. This is one Casimir invariant. It will commute with everything because it is a Lorentz invariant. The J's will not touch it, and the P's will also of course commute with it. So this is one invariant which we call M square. What is the other Casimir invariant for this? Anyone else knows? It's not just spin. So there is a 4 vector called Pauli-Lubansky vector. So it took a long time, okay, it was like in mid 40s or sometime that, and involved Pauli. So you construct a W mu which is equal to epsilon mu nu rho sigma times J nu rho P sigma. Now you remember, has this been done before? No? Okay. So now you learn it. So we may as well break the field theory for a bit to just recover this well-known facts of relativistic quantum mechanics. That the one Casimir invariant comes simply from this, and the other one is constructed out of this W. So W mu turns out to have magnitude m square times j into j plus 1. Okay, where j is the would be Casimir invariant of only the rotations. Okay, the j into j plus 1 would have been there, is exactly the same as would have been there if you had not put in translations. Just to explain quickly what this W mu is a really mysterious thing, and you may wonder how the thought up of it. The point is, if you look at it in the particle's own frame of reference, so for a massive particle at least, in the rest frame, P mu equal to m00, right, m and 0 vector. So you choose the sigma to be 0, so then W, right, so once we set this, the sigma has to be necessarily 0. Once that is 0 and you have this completely antisymmetric vector, this can never be 0, right. So it will become Wi equal to epsilon ijk jjk times m. But this is our friend the angular momentum. I don't know what reasoning they used, but yeah, it's very clever construction. Yes. So the important and really the most important statement at this point is that there is nothing that instructs you to put spin in quantum mechanics. A lot of people think that since Dirac equation came from special relativity and it contains spin, therefore we have spin. It's all completely wrong ideas, because you can write a perfectly valid relativistic wave equation which is Klein-Gordon equation. There is no spin to be seen in it. Okay. So you can perfectly do relativity without any spin. But lot of people seem to think that Dirac proved that spin has to be there in relativity. Without spin we could not have had a relativistic wave equation. Completely wrong. You have perfectly valid relativistic wave equations without any spin in them. In fact, there is nowhere that you learn from within the formalism that you need to put in the so-called intrinsic spin. You are forced to assume, due to observations in nature, that J has two parts, where L can be constructed from our postulate number 4, which said that all observables can be constructed out of the canonical ones. So L is of course constructed as R cross P, but this S cannot be constructed from any canonical variable. You have to take it on face value. You have to put it out of your pocket. Okay. So not constructible out of this has to be put by hand. But once you put it, and there is the beautiful plus sign, whatever that plus means, once you put it, the algebra is exactly same as that of J, and we know in fact that the algebra of J is complex and allows for both integer and half integer point values, and so that fortunately matches what we observe in nature. It allows you to introduce spin half. But that is all there is, and the square of this W mu will come out to be m squared times J squared, and so that is the other Casimir invariant. So you have to take the other Casimir invariant and factor out the m, then you get, so whatever this J is in the particle's own rest frame, it will of course become just S. Only the intrinsic spin will remain. You sit at the location of the particle in its own rest frame, there will be no orbital angular momentum. What remains is by definition what is spin. Okay. And so the other Casimir invariant has value m squared S into S plus 1, and that is what we put. The auxiliary, not canonically obtainable but observed in nature observable, is what is spin. Okay. So in the constructive approach then, it goes like this, and you choose the A dagger to be like this, and at this point you argue that you need to construct fields. Why we got on to this point was this this relativistically invariant difference derivatives we put, because if we just went by the analogy, then we should have just put the other coordinates that we introduced should also be just that square, but instead we put this because we are trying to implement the Poincare group, and there you impose, you need to reorganize we can show unitarity, causality and Lorentz invariance. We need to assemble, so recipe has subparts. And there would be some species label, it could be a spinor, electromagnetism, whatever it is, okay. So, but schematically we write it as sum over these alphas, well we can now write k and sigma, that does not matter. So, A of k sigma and then we need to put in some u of k sigma with some Lorentz indices A. So this A are except that they are not necessarily just a mu, not just space-time ones, but they could be spinor ones, but they represent the Lorentz group in the spinor rep. So somehow it is a Lorentz. So and we are forced to put these are functions of x. So the and A. No? I meant to put that A outside, right. So certainly A will be related to the value of this sigma, okay. So sigmas will be related to it will be some other representation, but it will be a representation, but same, matching it. And the recipe C is to construct interaction Hamiltonian. So this part C is a recipe about constructing which we will see later. So to be so if you will remind me, I will tell you when we get to that point. But the point is that in this way of doing things, you never write the free wave equation. So this reason why I am telling you is that historically, because Dirac pulled his equation like out of the hat, it left people stunned for almost 20 years. People couldn't work, they couldn't sleep, because they thought, how do we now write equations for higher spin? So the causal statement is that, causality statement is that only if you assemble them like this, will you get that support on the light cone right if you take their bracket, if you take their commutators. If you calculate their Feynman propagator, only if they have been assembled in this form I shouldn't say Feynman propagator. So actually it is the 2-point function. You calculate their commutator. That commutator will be relativistically covariant only if you have assembled them as spacetime fields like this, with both this and its conjugate part included. Yes, so it will correctly capture this. So these are the A by themselves are just they are nuts and bolts, right? In fact, Feynman is supposed to have commented somewhere, how can you have a creation operator for an electron, because you are violating electric charge, creating charge out of the vacuum. Well, I am not anybody to correct Feynman, but it's just a calculation device. It doesn't actually create anything. Okay, so by themselves they are rather bare. They begin to acquire a physical or more compatible physical appearance only if you assemble them like this. That is the statement. And there is very beautiful reason why you of how you assemble the H interaction and how the unitarity follows, but that's a much longer story and it's a different path. Right now we want, but I just wanted to say the most important remark is that this bit, the so-called free field theory, is not required in that constructive approach because it's already solved for. You already put these quantum numbers. So, and they satisfy the, and you only put the k because it is on shell. The m I've erased, but we showed that there are 2 Casimir invariants and 4 mutually commuting observables. Out of the 2 Casimir invariants, one is here, I mean square root of. The other Casimir invariant got used up in reducing from this 4 to 3. It's on shell. Okay. So that is how these are listed. So we exhausted all there is to this beautiful differential equation, the Klein-Gordon equation, over which often half of the quantum 3 course is spent trying to tell you that it has bad interpretation, it gives you negative probabilities. All this is not really required at all. It's not part of quantum theory at all. You don't have to worry. If you start quantum theory right, this is the process. Implement classically observed symmetries on the Hilbert space by constructing the operators that have the same commutation relations as the classical ones have the Lie algebra. That is the realize, and with an advanced assumption that we will recover these operators out of the canonical variables of the system, which we eventually do. We can recover them out of the phi and pi, phi and the canonical conjugates. But the point is that the free equation is already solved and there is no further content to Klein-Gordon equation than imposing the energy momentum relation. That's all there really is. All the rest there is the spin content, which you have to carefully construct into the construction of the functions u. They are either the spinor functions or the polarization vectors of the electromagnetic, epsilon polarized. So that's, and of course e raised to I k, which is solution of that. It's already built in. So the free theory is already solved. There is nothing to be done about it. And that is where we have a bit of a contrast, because here the free propagator appears and it has the free wave equation and you etc. So for the quantized field, everything goes through exactly as before. So I can hurry up a little bit and say that therefore we write the W of J now. Now we switch to the notation J, current. It will be equal to W0 times e raised to minus I over 2 integral of, and the same notation J1 delta F now delta F12 J2, where, so and then we get so delta Feynman 1 2 Okay, so let's just specify how this is with respect to the Klein-Gordon equation. It is equal to d mu minus m squared delta f equal to minus delta 4. Sign is not right, isn't it? Box plus m square I have to write, because box in my definition is dt square minus dx squared. So dx square will minus dx square will give plus p squared. So it should because of the I, it will act on e raised to I omega t. So because of the i's, I have to put a plus m square here, which is probably required here also. So far so good. And as a trailer of next time, let me tell you that if you now do the same trick, right? Yes. So anyway, so long as these signs remain the same, it is fine. Correct. If you now use your machinery of varying with respect to external current, often people put this 2 because you go to endpoint functions. This W. Evaluated at j equal to 0, you will find Feynman propagator here, and for if you do it for G4, so you will find that the odd ones are always vanishing, because remember that after differentiation you have to set j equal to 0. So if you differentiate, and this expression is quadratic in j, j and j. So if you have varied j once, this thing would have come down from the exponent with a j sitting in front. So it will become 0 when you set j equal to 0. So only the even numbered Green's functions are non-zero, and if you try to do this, it will become factored into delta f12, delta f34, so x1, x2, x3, x4. But plus alternatives. So you can just check next time, we'll check it in more detail next time. So the 4-point function will just boil down to a sum of terms, each of which is again product of pairwise 2-point functions. And this is how eventually the particle interpretation emerges, because you always have these 2-point functions appearing everywhere. So it's something propagating from one point to the other. You can draw the Feynman propagator as a line, and so eventually those are the building blocks. So the building blocks of Green's functions eventually are these ticks and blobs, which are vertices. That is what we will show in the next 1 or 2 lectures.